Oi, oi, Savaloy, it's your boy, bringing joy to the hoi polloi. The Jessica Rose Clark of having a lark. Jack Slack, and it's the Jack Slack podcast coming at you midweek. If you don't know what a Savaloy is, it's a red sausage that you order with your chippy tea. And if you want to know why I'm running late this week, it's because I wrote my article post-fight and then lost the will. No, I just got tied up. But we're talking about UFC 276 a couple of days late, and we'll be talking about whatever UFC fight night it is. RDA versus Fiziev. We'll get to it later. But I think the main takeaway for everyone is, god damn, how good is Alexander Volkanovski? Very good. We all knew that. But, you know, he's had two close fights with Max Holloway, which I think people lost sight of. People who believed that Volkanovski won those fights have since been like, still think he won, or Holloway won those first two fights. And you're like, well, no, this fight doesn't change the first two fights. This fight was just something new altogether and incredibly impressive. And if you want to know what sort of tactical and technical level we're talking about here, very, very rare that a guy who's... This is the thing. I mean, officially, Volkanovski won all three. But watching them, first one was more Volkanovski for me. Second one, Holloway came in with some adjustments and gave Volkanovski a lot of trouble. Depending on how you score, I think it's the third round that matters to people. But Holloway's the one buzzing Volkanovski and hurting him in that fight. And then the third, Volkanovski makes a change and just blows him out of the water. It's very rare in trilogies across both boxing, kickboxing, MMA, for the guy who did well in the second fight not to win the third fight. Typically, the way that trilogies work is because, you know, you've got two top athletes. Typically, firstly, trilogies tend to happen at the top of the sport because if you're not really just vying for those first couple of positions in the division, there's no point in you fighting over and over again. You might as well fight someone else. But the better you get, you know, the more you are funneled back towards each other. So they tend to happen at the top of divisions, and they also tend to be... Normally the aging of one fighter will affect it, or just the sort of slowing down of one fighter will affect it. So typically the guy who has trouble in the second fight will also have trouble in the third fight. And I don't know exact stats on this, but I do remember that any time that there's a trilogy or a rubber match coming up in the UFC, there's always an article that goes up about previous trilogies in the UFC, and it's almost always second fight winner is also the third fight winner. But then I suppose there are some notable exceptions. Quinton Jackson and Rampage and Wanderlei Silva met twice very early in, or earlier in Rampage's career, rather. And Rampage got better and Wanderlei Silva hit a wall, and then they met a third time, and it really wasn't necessary. I think everyone knew ahead of time that Rampage was probably going to smoke him, and he did. But it meant a huge deal to Quinton Jackson, even though everyone else watching it was going, yeah, well, Vandy's been losing a lot lately. His only win is Keith Jardine. But then they did a fourth in Bellator, and because Quinton Jackson's diet is just frosting, that was actually really evenly fought too. So there are exceptions to all these rules. But I'm saying, like, if you're at the top of the game, very unusual for guys to trade wins or trade quality performances, at least. Because, again, we're always at the mercy of the judges. But as I've already said, I wrote an article on this fight specifically. If you want to see all the details and the diagrams and the fucking stills and things, go read it if you're a Patreon boy. If you're not a Patreon boy, sign up to the Patreon, read it, unsubscribe afterwards. Or stay subscribed because you get the boycast and all the other shit. But it was a very impressive fight. I was really blown away by how Volkanovski looked. And there were some moments from Max that it was kind of like Tyron Woodley against Gilbert Burns. He was very much, well, maybe not that bad, but he was very much dominated. And the good moments were more like, oh, cool, you know, he's still technically very, very, very good. It's just he's not anywhere near this other guy tonight. Right off the bat, Holloway using the floating step again. Floating step or faked teep or Toby Komi, if you're a Japanese karate nerd. Standing in your stance, left foot forward as your max. And instead of stepping in to jab, which got you punted in the leg a dozen times in the first fight and changed the flow of the fight altogether, made you go southpaw for the third, 3/5 rounds. Instead of that, you pick your leg up and then slide in on one foot and put it down. Like that's the move. It doesn't look like a whole lot, but it can give people real problems, and it gave Volkanovski real problems in the second fight. It's a nice way of getting close enough to do hitting without having to present your lead leg on a platter. What you noticed, the theme throughout this entire fight was Volkanovski giving ground, and you heard his corner constantly saying, draw him out, bring him onto it, walk him onto the punches, because Max kept floating in behind the lead leg, but it's quite hard to go from floating in behind the lead leg into punching without opening yourself up a bit. And you're coming in behind the lead leg, you're coming in. Holloway's fighting tall and short stance, where in his boxing stance he's longer and more bladed, but he's fighting tall and short because tall and narrow, because that puts him in position to float step, that puts him in position to check kicks. But the higher you stand in your stance, the more susceptible you are to the overhand. So the one thing that played out over and over again in this fight was Holloway coming in behind the floating lead leg, trying to start punching, and Volkanovski smacking him over the top with the overhand, and then coming up with an up jab to push his head back, or just smothering him in the clinch. And the same thing happened when Volkanovski was leading. He'd jab, dip, and then as Holloway came back, he'd throw the overhand. The jab and dip is... There was a... I can't remember the girl's name. Hold on, she's behind me on my bookshelf. Fuck it, can't find it. But there was an Olympic boxing coach for the US women's team who wrote a book called, I think, The Ultimate Boxer. And she said that her number one move, teaching amateurs or getting the team training, because people come to her are already accomplished amateurs, is the jab and dip. Because you jab, if you score, you score. That's a point for you. That's damage done. That's whatever. This is back in the days when they were doing punch counting. So this book also has a section on the various judging setups, because at smaller international competitions, they'll have a 3-judge setup. At larger ones, they'll have a 5-judge setup, or would back in the day. And it'd say so in a 5-judge setup and a 3-judge setup, you've got 4 sides to the ring, so they're not getting an equal view in every position of the ring. So she says, go to this part of the ring if you need a break, and go to this part of the ring when you want to score points. But anyway, sorry. So she says the jab and dip is the most important technique in boxing for her. And really, it's so useful if you see it done well. Roberto Duran would be my favourite example of this, because he was very much sort of an infighter for most of his lightweight career. And he goes up to welterweight and even up to middleweight. And he's old and fighting actual welterweights and middleweights, and he's just sort of a porky old man. But he starts doing better on the outside by use of the jab and dip. If you jab and then you either slip your head right, or you slip your head left, or you slip straight down, you just bob at the at the legs and put your head in the middle of their chest, you've moved your head after your jab. Almost everyone in the world, after a certain amount of boxing or kickboxing training, will fire back the moment you throw a jab at them, whether it's just in their vision or on the end of their nose, or not even coming close. They'll throw back at you because they want to counter you. So that's where Volkanovski was having a lot of success in this fight. He was jabbing, dipping, and then if the jab didn't connect, it didn't matter, because he was dipping and then throwing the overhand afterwards. But then you got, on the other end of that, Max Holloway was trying to make longer exchanges as the fight went on, because that's where he felt he could try and wear on Volkanovski a bit. So he's Volkanovski's jabbing and dipping, Holloway's throwing back, getting countered, and then he's trying to move his head and throw back and counter again. So he's trying to extend these exchanges. So what Volkanovski did a very good job of was jabbing, dipping, throwing his counters, and then smothering Holloway before the exchanges became too long. Moving to the clinch, grabbing the double collar tie, grabbing the over-under. If you saw his over-under in this fight, the over-under is 1 underhook and 1 overhook from the clinch. And if you saw him, he locked his hands around Holloway's back, and then he dropped his overhook elbow so tightly to Max Holloway's waist that Holloway's underhook was basically useless. And then he pushed him to the fence, and Holloway uses the underhook to get off the fence a lot. He's a really good, really underrated takedown defense guy. I don't know what you call that, a takedown defense technician. But this was something we looked at when that last-minute Khabib-Holloway fight was made, and I was going, damn, that's actually a really fun fight, because a lot of it is footwork to stay off the fence, but even when he's on the fence, what he does very well, and what Israel Adesanya does, we were talking about this on the Boycast, but one of the things that Israel Adesanya does a lot better than what I've seen of Alex Pereira is both of them can stay up along the fence or use the fence to get up, which is not a rarity. The wall walk is so powerful that Conor McGregor got up from underneath Khabib numerous times. It's just that if you can't disengage, you're still on the fence and you're still at a disadvantage getting taken down again. Max Holloway and Israel Adesanya typically are very good at disengaging when they're stuck along the fence. And that's the difference between winning and losing at this point, because guys like Kamaru Usman, they'll let you stand up along the fence, but what have you accomplished? You're getting taken down along the fence again. You're not out in the open. I mean, we got the Leon Edwards Kamaru Usman rematch coming up, and the story of that first fight was that Leon Edwards could get up along the fence, but he couldn't get off the fence. So you saw Max, like, if he realised that his underhook wasn't going to work for him or whatever, he'd just turn his back and give up the back body lock and break the hands apart. So he was really good at being active and getting stuff done from there. The threat of the inside trip was always there for Volkanovski because he hit it in the fifth round of their second fight and held Max there for a good portion of the round. But I feel like he was using the threat more just to set up strikes, which was really cool because he used to do a lot of this. If you watch his fight with Mizuto Hirota in the UFC, his early UFC run is boxing people to the fence, using the clinch, and then hitting them with big shots on the break. He was a really big fan of that John Jones back elbow, which the secret is you've got to push into the guy along the fence, but you've got to free your hands while you're doing it. So you try and push into them with your head, and then you slip your hands back to your body so that you're free to spin into the elbow. But he also did some nice elbows, like straight elbows, as in, not straight elbows, but standing still, not spinning elbows. He did a couple of along the fence and broke with some right hands. It was really nice. It was a really nice way to win the exchange, apply the clinch so that Holloway couldn't continue the exchange, push him to the fence with the threat of tripping him, and then break and hit him again. And Holloway eventually, he got into a bad position because whenever Holloway's in a fight and he's down and has to get a finish, he can't. He's not a big hitter. So you really noticed him going to his big techniques more. He doesn't have a lot of big, as in fight enders, but his back kick is one of them. You know, he smoked Anthony Pettis with a back kick. So he started pulling out loads of those about round 3. But he sort of drifted away from the floating step. And then Volkanovski went back to the retreating right low kick, which has been a huge weapon for him in recent years. If you go read Advanced Striking 2.0, which I made open for everyone last week. Advanced Striking 2.0, Alexander Volkanovski, we talk about it. If you watch him against Ortega, Holloway, the first one is the most notable one, but Ortega, Korean Zombie, sorry, losing my voice, he does that slide back and punt the lead leg as they're stepping in, and it's so powerful. The calf kick, it's not magic that it's hitting the calf at the right place on the calf, it's more that they're in the process of putting their foot down and then he kicks it. And if you watch it and put it in slow-mo, you'll notice that he holds his hip back, and he often has both hands up in a guard when he does it. It's not a traditional, I want to get as much power in this as possible, low kick where he's turning his hip over. It's coming up at an angle. It's he's got his hands both in his guard. He's not throwing one back, and he's holding his hip back too. So it really is just like kicking you with his leg. But because it's timed well when your weight is coming down on that leg and is placed well, it really affects people. So in the fifth round, he starts landing those on Max again, and you're back to fight number 1 because Max is trying to come forward and put punches on him, and he just can't. Really amazing performance from Volkanovski. If you want more technical details, like I said, go read the article. But to do that to someone of Max Holloway's level, and we did say coming into this one, Volkanovski's just had an amazing performance over a guy who he was expected to beat easily, but not that easily, in the Korean Zombie. And Max Holloway had just had a bad fight against someone who I thought was decent, but probably not going to be able to keep up with him on the feet. And Max Holloway had to take Yair Rodriguez down to win that fight. Like, he couldn't just win it in a straight kickboxing match. So very interesting. I'll be interested to see what Max does next, but I think he's still the elite of the elite. I said this week, best outcome is Volkanovski Holloway 4. And people were like, what? Wow. And you're like, well, do you want to watch Josh Emmett get a title shot? Because as much as Volkanovski says he wants to do lightweight, and I'm sure he does, they're not going to let him immediately. They've got too much shit going on in that weight class. They've got Habib's protege, who, whether or not he's as good or as interesting as Habib, still has that built-in audience. They're not going to pass up the 25 million Instagram followers that Habib has or whatever. So they've got to get that Charles-Islam match together, and whether they want to do Volkanovski-Charles, Volkanovski-Islam, whatever, they're not going to do that until that fight's resolved. And then Volkanovski saying that like he's going to be an active champion at 2weight. You're going, no, you're not. Everyone always says that, and they don't. No one has. Amanda Nunes occasionally defends her featherweight belt, but that's just a super fight against a bum, really. That's like she gets free tune-ups every half a year. But the prospect of Volkanovski at lightweight is very compelling. It's quite interesting because lightweight is big on the strong grapplers right now. You've got the Makachev, I mean, Oliveira has become a strong wrestler, so he goes for his grappling now. It's not just getting him up from the bottom. You got Gamrot, you got Dariush, and then once you're coming out of the top 10, you've got the Gillespies, Ferreiras, Ismagalovs, all sorts of other dudes who are just very tricky grapplers. And wrestlers is what I'm saying, people who will take you down. Whereas featherweight's kind of light on that. For a long time, featherweight was dominated by wrestlers with good overhands, but it was more the overhands than it was the wrestling. Maybe the wrestling worked as a threat, but it was just explosive midgets with overhands from the Team Alpha Male mold. And Conor McGregor masterfully avoided fighting wrestlers on the way up, with the exception of Chad Mendes fresh off the couch. But then you looked at it and there just weren't many wrestlers in that weight class. And you knew, watching it at the time, I was writing about it at the time and going, I know what they're doing here. We can all see this. But, they're not going to take a step backwards and put him in with Clay Guida, who might have been a more difficult matchup because of his wrestling, but was behind where they'd already advanced Conor McGregor to with wins over Dustin Poirier. And Volkanovski used his wrestling a lot in his early UFC run, but hasn't met many wrestlers. Chad Mendes, but Chad Mendes struck with him. Chad Mendes is super double leg, but other than that, really not going to wrestle much. We're not talking about a Mateusz Gamrot, Islam Makhachev, someone whose whole game is putting their wrestling on you and grinding you. So Volkanovski really hasn't met anyone who does that in the UFC at a high level. And to be honest, neither is Max Holloway. It's just how that division is shaken out. So if you go up to lightweight, it's not only dealing with bigger, stronger men, it's dealing with bigger, stronger men who do things that require the strength that the smaller men haven't been doing. I mean, Volkanovski fought at welterweight at one point in Australia when he was coming down, because he went welterweight, lightweight, featherweight. But he was doing it at a level where he was already clearly elite, and he was fighting guys in the backwaters of Australian MMA promotions, whereas now he's doing it again. You're going to jump in with the best guys in the world, because no one wants to take a fight in the weight class above that's not for the title. It's maybe actually Anderson Silva did back in the day. He just sort of do it to fuel speculation over whether he could beat John Jones. But it's like Kamaru Usman this week. He posed a photo with Blachowicz, where the angle was set to make their biceps look enormous. But people were going, well, now you can see that he's big enough to compete at light heavyweight. And you're going, well, why does he almost kill himself to make welterweight then? And even if he didn't, that's 2 weight classes up. It's not 1 weight class up. This bollocks that he's been talking all week about how he's going to skip Izzy out of respect to Izzy because he's his African brother or whatever. And he'll go to light heavyweight because he could pick off the champ or whatever. If you're buying that shit, it's the Anderson Silva stuff where you just say shit and there's no possible way you'll ever do it, but people go, hey, he's willing to, and you get the points for it like you did it. I just want you all to remember, whenever someone says anything like that, just go, everyone at the highest levels of mixed martial arts is coming in on the dot for weight. They're not half-arsing it. They're not coming in with a pound or 2 to spare. They are on the dot, and they are dehydrated. They are risking kidney failure or kidney stones, and they're doing that for a reason. They don't. If they think they need that, why would they be comfortable going up 2 weight classes to fight people who are doing that to make that weight? It's like someone has a moment of dominance at the top of the division, and people just get moronic. Now, of course, if he ever does go up to light heavyweight and win some fights there, I will, of course, apologise. But right now, it's just flapping gums and making noise. Like how he thinks he's got something for Canelo. He doesn't. He wants the money. He just wants Canelo to agree to... Well, I mean, he knows that Canelo will never agree to that fight because Canelo has some dignity. But it's just a good way to get people talking about you. And if Canelo did accept the fight, I mean, it's win-win for Kamaru because he's not going to win. He'll make hundreds of millions of dollars off it. He's at his best when he's just shutting up and fighting welterweights in MMA. So rest of this card, I was going to call it firstly I called it UFC 276 mixed bag, but I've also called it UFC 276 middleweight is bad. Israel Adesanya easily defended his title in the main event. Was not an eventful fight. This is the thing. It's a sport. Winning's the most important thing. You are also within your rights to not enjoy a particular fighter's style or not enjoy a particular fight. And Izzy's on there's been a couple where he just sort of hasn't looked like what people expected him to look like. But most of this I would put, a lot of this I would put at Cannonier's doorstep. But then equally, like we said in the boycast, Cannonier, not a strong takedown artist, relies on his stand-up, not a great cardio fighter either. This seemed like it should have been sort of a showcase for Israel Adesanya, and it didn't really turn into a showcase. It turned into a sort of a cruise control performance. In terms of what you saw from Izzy, the classic looks against when he was orthodox, he squared himself, used the rear hand to check Cannonier's jab, shot his own jab from a coiled position, and hammered in the calf kick. When he went southpaw, he dug in body kicks with his left leg and turned over high kicks. Cannonier, he landed a couple of good shots coming out of the clinch, which could be a nice idea because we talked about how Izzy is very good at breaking from the clinch along the fence typically. And to do that, you do have to use your hands. So it's a great time to hit people. Anytime you're doing involved clinch fighting, the moment the guy starts breaking out of it, he's using his hands to fight the clinch. So if you can get your hand up quicker and smash him in the head, that's always good. But unless it was part of a smarter, more rounded performance, it's not that much of a game changer. That fight I sort of just drifted through. I'd watched the Volkanovski Holloway fight, and that was the hypest shit. And then I watched the Adesanya Cannonier fight, and I just wasn't super interested. So rather than just like talking about how it could have been more interesting, I think I'll just move on. Though I will say, fucking dudes coming out on Twitter and saying Izzy's boring. A lot of them are former Izzy opponents who made boring fights with him. Marvin Vettori was 100% responsible for that fight being boring. And he's out there talking smack. People posting clips of Yoel Romero talking about how boring Izzy is. Yoel Romero, unless he's fighting an absolute bum nowadays, even when he's not fighting an absolute bum, he will wait for 14 minutes of a 15-minute fight. I'm just waiting for Jake Shields and John Fitch to weigh in on the situation, is what I'm saying. Maybe Bilal Muhammad. But the reason I was saying the middleweight is bad, this is the card, middleweight is bad, was because we had the slow as molasses Andre Muniz versus Uriah Hall fight in there as well. Dricus du Plessis, he was bad, but it was a good, fun fight. And then Sean Strickland's performance. We'll get onto Strickland in a minute because I'll put a timestamp because people are going to come straight for that, I imagine, and then go back and listen to the rest of the podcast. But actually, no, fuck it. We'll do it now. We'll do it live. Strickland versus Pereira. This was insane because we talked about this in the lead up to it, but it got us talking again about how you can manufacture a career path for someone if they have a specific set of skills, the Liam Neeson gimmick. But, if someone's got strengths, you can matchmake to accentuate those strengths and hide, expected weaknesses. So Brock Lesnar, when he came in, they put him in against Frank Mir. He ended up getting submitted by Nibar or whatever it was. And everyone was like, well, that's what happens when you put in a wrestler with a great jiu-jitsu player. But Frank Mir's history up to that point had been trying a big submission, gassing out, getting stuck on the bottom and getting pounded out. He had a long history, I think about 4 TKO losses where he got stuck underneath people and pounded out. And then in the rematch, obviously, Brock Lesnar had better positional control and just did pound him out exactly as expected. Mir also does not have good takedown defense. Or he didn't, at the time, have particularly good striking. Not like when he fought Pulev the other week. Fuck. Pulev's actually boxing Derek Chisora this weekend. That's probably the closest to an almost sanctioned murder that I've ever seen. They let a guy who just fought, I think he's fought Klitschko, but he just fought Anthony Joshua for a world title and lost. They let him fight Frank Mir in 4-ounce gloves, boxing, immediately after that. But anyway, Strickland versus Pereira. We were saying, matchmaking-wise, there aren't a lot of grapplers in the top end of middleweight. Guys who really want to take you down. You got Brunson, you got Muniz coming up now. But with the deterioration of Weidman, the retirement of Jacare, there just aren't many guys who want to take you down. Jack Hermansson maybe, but he can't really take people down. He's not very good at it. It's just like, if you watch his fights, the one with Vettori is the one that I'm thinking of the most, but Cannonier as well. Doesn't set up his shots well. If you defend one shot, his striking becomes atrocious. Hermansson looking more and more like a flash in the pan, to be honest. But you know that those guys, this is the thing, with a Hermansson, he's probably good enough that he will be able to recognize that he's not going to win a fight on the feet with Alex Pereira and apply his takedown. Whereas Sean Strickland came into this fight saying he was going to strike with Alex Pereira and then struck with Alex Pereira and got knocked out. Now, a kickboxing pedigree is not magic. There was that guy, there's a former Glory champion fought the other week, and he just got knocked out by Tyson Nam on the feet as well. A Glory kickboxing world title is not magic. Jim Miller knocked down Dwayne Ludwig. There's a lot of examples of kickboxers just getting smacked in MMA. But one of the great aids to outstriking a kickboxer in MMA is the threat of the takedown being there. At no point was the threat of the takedown here, because Sean Strickland's walking towards him with his feet together in like a little T and picking up his lead leg and trying to teep with him. I want to say that there is, if you are so obviously going to try and take someone down and then you just leap on it from the start, that's bad too. I gave Ryan Bader the But Why Slacky Award for piss poor game planning when he fought Anthony Rumble Johnson, and everyone knew that Bader would want to take him down, but Bader immediately dived on a single leg and got sprawled on and punched into unconsciousness. You have to do some striking to set these things up, but you should ideally be going between the two. Sean Strickland came out, and the reason that I've always hated watching Sean Strickland striking in his little middleweight run is that it's technically bad, it's mechanically bad, but it's working on guys who it shouldn't. And, it's jab, standing with his feet almost together, jabbing, leaning backwards, and reaching way out in front of himself to parry. And he's done this forever. And it's worked on guys like Uriah Hall, Jack Hermansson. It's really depressing that these guys can't work out that if a guy's leaning back and reaching, that's really bad position to be in. Meanwhile, Alex Pereira immediately realizes, if I jab him, he's going to reach way out for it. If I jab him in the body, he's going to reach down for it and lean back. And at several points in this match, he's on one leg doing that as well. And then just lines up the best left hook in kickboxing history. He just, it's the perfect punch for this guy. And it wouldn't be so funny if Sean Strickland hadn't gone off in the pre-fight interviews being like, Alex Pereira's technique, what technique? He's just tall. He hasn't had to learn to strike properly like me. He benefits from being tall. And I'm watching this and going, your defense is leaning straight back. That is the tall man defense. That's not learning to strike well. Insane. I mean, he seemed pretty cool about it in the aftermath. He was pretty real about it in his post-fight interviews and on Instagram and stuff. But he still thought that he was winning that fight based on landing a couple of jabs or trading jabs, basically, while reaching for Pereira's, while Pereira was pretty much working him out. I mean, Pereira didn't even have to do much reconnaissance in this fight. He went around the ring a little bit, kicked him in the leg a couple of times, poked him with the jab to the belly, and realised that he was making the biggest overcommitments to parry that jab. And then he moved in and left hooked him. Actually walked him onto the left hook, which was quite nice. But if he hadn't left hooked him, he'd have head kicked him because he was setting up the left high kick. He was throwing the left body kick and the left leg kick. And if he hadn't done that, he'd have faked the jab or poked the jab out there and kicked him in the head on the left side, because that's exactly where Strickland never has any defense, and he's always leaning back that way anyway. And I've been saying for a while, you're going to start seeing a lot of left hook knockouts, and I've specifically been saying on the counter because the left hook is the king of the counters. But I think you're going to start seeing more and more of those whipping left hook lead knockouts because guys reach so much for the parry. The one the other day, Tefon Nchukwi versus, was it Ulberg? That was one of the worst I'd ever seen, reaching for the jab. And it was a body jab went in and he just reached down for it every time. And then this came along and was worse. But even Max Holloway in the main event reached for Volkanovski's jab. Volkanovski whipped a left hook around the side. The body jab makes MMA fighters stupid. I think because a lot of them are taught that they shouldn't react to it, or it shouldn't be a big issue, or they should take it and punch back or whatever. And the reason the body jab works generally is because in your classical boxing or kickboxing stance, you cover all the important stuff except your solar plexus, which is just there on the front. And you can't really cover it without bringing an elbow in and compromising your position or reaching down to it. And if you reach down to it, you open up something else. I mean, Junior Dos Santos' career go and watch it again, because it's just full of body jabbing and throwing the right straight to the body, and guys reaching for him, or they'll either reach down to parry and he'll slap him in the head, or they'll punch at him as he changes levels and he'll throw a punch across the top. The Cain Velasquez first fight, on the subject of trilogies, but on the first fight with Cain Velasquez, he throws a right straight to the body. Cain Velasquez tries to jab him while he's going for the right straight to the body, and he throws the right hand across the top and knocks him out. Or watch Gustafsson versus John Jones. Good fighters who don't have to deal with the body jab every day will start making really bad defensive choices when they're confronted with the body jab. But this has been genius, because Alex Pereira is now in title contention. He's just flown by loads of guys who can stop a double. Khamzat was coming out going, I will fight this guy. And you're going, no, you've been played, mate. Fair enough, you're at welterweight, you've already got stuff going on, but the entire middleweight division has been played, because it's just like, yeah, we'll put him in with Sean Strickland, who's going to try and stand with him and reach for all his punches. If you're Brunson or someone like that, you've got to be looking at this guy going, I could beat this guy. I can't beat a lot of guys, but I could beat this guy. I'd expect Edmund Shabazian or, Marvin Vettori. We talked about how there aren't a lot of takedown artists in the middleweight division, but Marvin Vettori came in as a kickboxer and decided to start taking people down because there isn't a lot of that going on in middleweight. He would probably take Pereira down, or at least grind him along the fence. But it doesn't matter, because they've done it now. Pereira's going to be in the top 5 when the rankings come out based on this one win. But they've moved him into position for the fight with Izzy, and it's a sort of super fight because it's a rematch of their 2 kickboxing matches. It's got a built-in drama. Izzy's already a pretty big star for them. Pereira's got a ton of knockout footage that can go viral. This fight went viral. Additionally, Sean Strickland will talk the shit out of a fight, so that helps them. And when you talk about the actual fight, it's one of the interesting quirks of MMA. Alex Pereira doesn't have to be as good as an all-rounded fighter in MMA as Israel Adesanya does, because he's not fighting the wrestlers that Israel Adesanya did when he came up. He's not fighting Derek Brunson. He's fighting Israel Adesanya, who doesn't try to take people down typically. So, you've got basically a kickboxing rematch in a UFC title fight. But part of me wants Israel Adesanya to come out and low single him. That'd be so funny. There was a fight between, I think it was Gilbert Yvel and Czech Congo, back when they were both starting out in MMA and they were both kickboxers, and they just dived on each other's legs. And I think Czech Congo won it by heel hook or something. It was the worst fight or worst grappling match you've ever seen. It was just so funny. They both went in talking about how they're going to stand and bang, and they both thought that they'd have the edge because they'd been really working on their grappling hard. So can't wait. I'll do something. I'll probably do Advanced Striking 2.0 Alex Pereira, because he's been awesome for a long time. It's interesting because I was writing about him going into Glory Last Man Standing, a pay-per-view that I watched and no one else did. I think it was me and 5,000 other people watched Glory's pay-per-view. But he was just basically a boxer came over to kickboxing. He had a great left hook and fuck all else. He got blown out by, I think it was Artem Levin in the first round. And then I took my eye off him for a little while, and suddenly he became possibly the best knockout artist in the history of that division in kickboxing. Just amazing. Amazing eye for an opening, and absolutely ruthless when he finds it. And really rounded out his kicking game, has been doing great work with knees, built a better base on which to place that left hook, and started working into more appropriate kickboxing situations. If you watch his fights with whoever the Russian lad was that he fought for his last 2 in Glory, he does this thing where he has his hands quite wide, sort of making a window, inviting you to shoot straight through them, and then he'll turn his hips as you throw your left or your jab or your right straight. He'll turn his hips to his right, and he'll just with the power of his shoulders and hips turning, he'll throw this short left hook and knock people's heads off. Very scary guy. But Israel Adesanya really did make him look bad through their first fight. Anyway, what else was good on this card? Because my voice is really running out now. Brian Barberena versus Robbie Lawler was great fun. I saw the result, Robbie Lawler losing by TKO, but I went and watched the fight, and it was actually, I thought Robbie Lawler looked better than he had in quite a while. Now, Brian Barberena is just sort of a gutsy guy. He's there. I said on the Boycast, he's a young guy who's not really good enough to climb through the ranks as a young guy, but he's perfect for these older guys who the UFC wants to keep around for sort of name power. And in this fight, you sort of saw that. It was kind of reflective of his fight with Vicente Luque. He just tried to volume it up, and it worked quite well. Managed to shackle the dangerous counterpuncher with volume. Bullshit volume. No, not bullshit volume, because it was actual lots and lots of strikes. He wasn't fainting at all. Lawler, firstly, another southpaw, so you got to see Lawler apply his jab again. And his jab, he did it against Rory McDonald, who's an orthodox fighter, but when he's shooting 1-2s, he actually looks really sharp, and when he's bouncing on his feet. Because his whole career was spent as sort of a lead foot heavy fighter, throwing big wound up right hooks. His left hand was never much to write home about, and then he really sharpened it up through his second UFC stint. Who was that poor lad that he just gave a striking clinic against? Jacob something or other. Oh, sorry, no, Bobby Volker. He had 2 fights cancelled, and they got this guy Bobby Volker in the last minute. Fuck, that was 2013. That's 10 years ago. But that fight, he just shows every sort of look you can in a striking match, and you're going, oh well, Robbie Lawler's a little bit more technical than we all thought he was. Still a bit too much sort of standing there and trying to roll off punches, which is why the volume worked so well. Barberena should have thrown some low kicks there, to be honest, because that was what Lawler did to Johnny Hendricks in their fight. Oh no, was it Hendricks did it to Lawler? Fuck, I can't remember. Oh no, it was Hendricks did it to Lawler. Just throw bullshit volume and then low kick because Robbie Lawler's moving his head. But yeah, Brian Barberena gets the stoppage, probably the biggest name of his career, so good for him. And whistle-stop tour of the rest of the card. Jalen Turner versus Brad Riddell was really impressive because not only did he finish him with a mounted guillotine, but he hurt him on the feet to do it. On a 5-fight winning streak now, and finishing streak, which is amazing given how I first saw him against Vicente Luque, and he just looked like a rag in the wind in that fight. Pedro Munoz versus Sean O'Malley. If you're one of those people being like, Sean O'Malley deserves points for checking kicks, or Pedro Munoz wanted to get out of there or whatever, fuck off. In the boycast, go listen to the boycast. But since the build up to Marlon Vera versus Sean O'Malley, I've said guys should just switch stances whenever he switches and hammer in the kicks. Hammer in the low kicks. Makes his life harder if you switch every time he switches, because he wants to work against one stance and change stances to present himself new openings. What he doesn't like is if you switch with him every time. I thought Pedro Munoz would never do. Marlon Vera did do that, but Pedro Munoz, I thought he'd never do that because he's so one note. He's right low kick and that's it. Jose Aldo checked all his right calf kicks and he threw one left kick in that entire fight. He's just not shown to be a very smart fighter or very adaptable fighter. But he came out in this one, did exactly that. He just switched stances with Sean O'Malley, threw his rear leg whenever he could, and O'Malley checked some kicks but took a lot of kicks and landed 2 punches in the fight total. But another nice chance to make a ton of excuses for Sean O'Malley and fight some chinny old man in 6 months. Jim Miller beating Donald Cerrone was cool. Oh, actually, this one was interesting because Donald Cerrone always looking for that switch high kick, and his corner were begging him to set it up. He always just goes for it naked. And Jim Miller was just stepping in and pushing Cerrone over every time he did it. The takedown in the first round came off that, and the takedown in the second round came off that. Ian Gary was actually pretty good in this fight, checked a lot of kicks. Gabe Green backed him up to the fence and then didn't do anything with it, and Gary was punching well off the fence. There was an interesting... He hit this inside trip, kind of like Volkanovski, but the inside trip, if you watch really good guys do it, like Henry Cejudo, that was his number one takedown, I think in his wrestling career, but his number one takedown in MMA, definitely. Do it from the over-under. If you have an underhook and overhook, you do the trip on the overhook side, typically. Randy Couture used to do it with an underhook off the fence. He'd pull the guy with the underhook and then inside trip on the same side. But typically, if you're doing an over-under, you want to do the trip on the overhook side. But what Ian Gary did was he took his, rather than having an underhook and overhook, he locked his hands around the guy's back and then hit the inside trip on what would, the overhook but not overhooking side. He hit the trip that way. And then during the scramble after that, the guy would come up on his back. Kind of got himself into a head and arm position, women's MMA special. Dricus du Plessis versus Brad Tavares. How did this guy knock out Roberto Soldic? He keeps running in with his chin in the air, but he does hit people hard. Awesome fight. Really enjoyed it. Dricus du Plessis, fuck it. If he one day knocks out Alex Pereira in a striking match, that'll be amazing. Andre Muniz versus Uriah Hall was bizarre because the commentary team kept going on about how Saif Saud knows how to get Uriah Hall fired up. I've never seen Uriah Hall fired up in his life, and he definitely wasn't fired up in this one because Saif Saud kept saying, you need to fucking throw now, and then he wouldn't, and Andre Muniz would just move into the fence and take him down. Muniz's work from half guard was nice in the first round, threatening the Kimura, the Darce, and then passing off that. And then the armbar by Stoliarenko versus Jessica Rose Clark was nice too. So what we got going on this weekend? No Bellator, because they've disappeared again. We got RDA versus Rafael Fiziev, which, yeah, interesting. I don't know what to expect here, because Rafael dos Anjos, firstly, shouldn't be ranked where he is. And he's been sitting on that ranking forever since he got it by beating Paul Felder by split decision when Paul Felder was coming off a marathon back in... he was training for a marathon and he took the fight short notice because RDA was supposed to fight Makhachev, the fight they were trying to use to get Makhachev into the title picture. But since then, he did beat Renato Moicano, who, is not ranked but is legit. But I suppose the intrigue here is that he's fighting not a giant wrestler, which is his normal worst kind of matchup. He's fighting a fairly chonky striker in Rafael Fiziev. Fiziev coming off that awesome win over Brad Riddell, though Jalen Turner just did it quicker. And they booked this for February, March, and now. So yeah, there's been some issues. I suppose the intrigue here is, firstly, can Rafael dos Anjos get any wrestling going? Dos Anjos, obviously a southpaw. Fiziev, honestly, some of Brad Riddell's best moments in that fight came when he shifted into southpaw. So that could be intriguing. A lot of Fiziev's best work comes off his lead leg and his lead hook, which are set up best to batter orthodox fighters. But then how often does Rafael dos Anjos have to deal with a good left hook or a good left kick? They're not, those are the two lesser common weapons in MMA. Everyone's good with their rear hand. I think, probably we'll see that Rafael dos Anjos is very long in the tooth at this point. But is there anything else good on this card? You've got Said Nurmagomedov coming back against Douglas Silva de Andrade. Nurmagomedov attracted a load of attention with his win over Cody Stamann, our first round guillotine. Hadn't fought in like 2 years up till that point. Beat Mark Striegel. Only recent loss to Rani Barcelos, who is so good that most people won't even know how good he was. He's one of those fighters where a loss to him is like fine with hardcores, but other people go like, who the fuck is Rani Barcelos? But yeah, Nurmagomedov, obviously great name to have, but he looked really good in his last one against Cody Stamann, and he looked good. I mean, he's looked good in all his fights. He recently began the Everyone's Ducking Me playbook, which is always a winner with dumb fans. Meanwhile, Douglas Silva de Andrade is just a tough guy. He's not. I wouldn't rate him as particularly great anywhere, but he is tough and he cuts a ton of weight, and looks like the deprived class in Dark Souls, as I always say. But he's coming off a win over Morozov. It'll be an interesting test for Nurmagomedov at least. Fucking Chase Sherman fight on the main card against Jared Vandera. Have they fought before? Feels like they fight every week. Co-main event is Caio Borralho versus Armin Petrosian. Armin Petrosian looked great on the Contender Series. I thought I mistook him for the other Armin Petrosian, who is Giorgio Petrosian's brother, but he's not. But he did beat Gregory Rodriguez the other week. Someone was saying, I was arguing with someone about how Ian Gary's not actually that good. And they were saying, we were talking about the diabetic guy that Ian Gary fought in his first UFC fight. And they were going, well, is RoboCop bad too? And they meant Gregory Rodriguez, who, yes, is bad. But I thought they were talking about Roberto Soldic. And I was like, no, Roberto Soldic is great. This is middleweight. Everyone's a meme fighter. But yeah, Petrosian looked pretty good in his last two. And Caio Borralho, loved him on the Contender Series. His UFC debut, he hit a beautiful giggler. Sweep, that is. He looked like a young Machida in his Contender Series fight against Jesse Murray. Yeah, and he did the same shit in his UFC debut. Unfortunately, that was the week when we brought back technical decisions because Corey Anderson got fucked by one against Nemkov, and then the UFC had two on the same card, and that was Borralho. I mean, he got the technical decision win, which is good, but he looked like he was on his way to an impressive decision or stoppage. Anything else I like on there? Michael Johnson versus Jamie Malarkey is like cool, You're both sort of on the way down, but your names. Cynthia Cavalier versus Nina Nunes. God, I don't care. Eamon Zahabi's around versus Ricky Tercius. The worst Shevchenko sister is fighting. Kennedy and Chukwu is fighting Kara Burson. Two bad light heavyweights who would both beat Kamaru Usman. And that's about it, man. Not a good card, but we've had a lot of good cards lately. So yeah, we'll survive. My voice is completely shot today, so I'm going to call it a day there. And I will be back with you on Monday for the post-fight breakdowns, and maybe write something in the meantime. If you want to get in on all the articles and extra podcasts, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to send an email to the podcast, I just had a coughing fit in between there. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Caio Baralho's neck tat bless.